familiar faces, lots of familiar organizational names, if not faces and names. Lots of new folks as well. Hi, Gayatri. Um, very happy to be here. I think this is as I probably mentioned on my LinkedIn post as well, probably the only topic that I'm qualified to speak on, which is volunteering. How much of it is true is something we'll know over the next half an hour or so. Uh, as Mika has already mentioned, I've been a part of IWT, been volunteering for the longest time that I remember, and have continued my journey in some or the other capacity. Volunteering reflections as a topic is something that I'm fairly very, very passionate about, because that is something that we were able to incorporate in a lot of program design and experiments that we did in volunteering, but also something that I have personally benefited a lot from as a volunteer, as a human being, as a professional, and so on. Bhumika, can we move to the next slide? Super. So we'll jump right in. Before we do that, just one quick round of question, and if folks, you can respond in the chat section. Um, uh, how many of you do reflections in general, like as a person, as an individual? Do you maintain a diary? Is there a mentor with whom you catch up, do reflections as a part of your professional team setups, etc.? Like, how many of you um, uh, generally do reflection? Doesn't matter how frequently, etc., but do you reflect as an individual, at a personal level, at a professional level? A yes or a no, or a thumbs up or a thumbs down in the comments would be great. Shweta says she does. Superb.
Amita, so I was trying to also talk to you. I spoke to Shalab on this. Uh, Totally that he wanted to understand.
Okay. Okay. Awesome. I think there are about more than 10 every day. Awesome. Uh, Individual level at phases. Okay. Superb. Um, awesome. And I know that we've already asked you to fill this in your in the form leading up to the session, but how many of you already also do have aspects of reflection in your volunteering programs, or just programs in general? Do you have some sort of reflection as a part of the design that you've already been doing? Shreya says yes. Um, Prachi says yes too. Okay. Vinod, Pooja, awesome. Awesome, awesome, awesome. Is there anybody who doesn't have reflection as a part of their program design? Like, very new to the idea, not very structured. Okay, none yet. Atma Santosh. Okay. Um, New to the idea. Okay, superb. Sucheta says she's not done it yet. Awesome. I think it's a good mix. Uh, Good mix of people who've either done it before. A lot more people, I think, have done it, have been doing it in their personal capacity. When it comes to your programs, it seems like it's a mix between people who are doing it, people who are new to the idea, people who are doing it but kind of very unstructured about it. Awesome. I think that gives me a flavor of the room for sure. Um, so essentially, when we think about reflection, and reflection, I think, is just a sort of a sub tool that we should look at. But overall, volunteering as a journey, there are three broad reasons why, and these are all based on my learnings and reflections. And could be wrong in some of these, but broadly, I feel that people typically volunteer with an organization or with a program for three reasons. I mean, there could be other incentives in terms of corporate volunteering, NSS credits, etc. But at the very core of when it's a conscious effort, when people are choosing to volunteer, there are three uh, 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 reasons or three questions that they would ask themselves at some point, maybe while signing up, maybe while they've already started their volunteering journey, or perhaps at a later stage. Number one is, why should we volunteer for this cause, right? Whatever cause areas that your respective programs engage people in, whether it's education, working with animals, persons with disabilities, etc. Why should one volunteer for this cause? This is a question that comes to people at different stages. Sometimes it may come at the beginning, I want to volunteer, there are so many opportunities, but why should I volunteer for this cause over something else, right? I'll just request all of us to hold these questions for now. We'll come at this after we've also looked at some ideas on how to navigate questions around reflections. But a very important question that often informs our reflection design, but also overall volunteer journey design, which is why volunteering. Why should one volunteer for this cause? The second question is, why should one volunteer for this organization? Now, within a cause, there could be obviously multiple opportunities for people to volunteer. So why should one choose to volunteer for your organization or for your program within the cause vertical? right? There are so many options, there are so many flexibility options that people may provide, other incentives, etc. So why should one choose to volunteer for your organization or your program within the cause or the vertical? And the third important question is, why should one volunteer for your particular organization or for the opportunity over either an extended period of time in terms of long term volunteering, or why should one do that as a repeat activity, right? Like you could have an event based volunteering activity as well, but why should people show up repeatedly week after week to come and volunteer for your program or organization? So fundamental questions: why volunteer for this why volunteer for this cause, why volunteer for your organization, and why do repeat or long term volunteering with you? Bhumika, can we switch? Awesome. So, before we go to the framework in terms of how can one think about designing a reflection session, uh, there are some factors that have typically helped me in even approaching reflection design as a problem statement, right? Like, what are some of the factors one should be aware of, be cognizant of while you are thinking of reflection, thinking of the volunteering program, etc., etc. Um, Bunch of them are fairly self-explanatory in the sense that you know what those entail. But I'll just quickly run all of us through the list. Uh, First is obviously nature of volunteering opportunity. What type of opportunity is it? Is it short term? Is it long term? Is it skill based? Is it event based, etc.? So, what kind of reflection activity you want to do, or what kind of program you have, will be a function of the kind of opportunity that you have. Second is, if it's a group activity, what's the group size? And that's an important factor when one thinks of reflection as an exercise. Uh, Another blind spot that I think people don't take into consideration while they design reflection activities is uh, a volunteer's past or previous volunteering experiences, right? Like, have they experienced something like this with another organization, or have they been a serial volunteer, or have they been doing multiple volunteering stints over the years, and then are coming at it with some preconceived notions or biases about volunteering as an activity in general and about volunteering for your particular cause or organization or opportunity, right? So how do we be cognizant of some of those while we are designing for a reflection activity? um, the medium of the opportunity, whether it's online, it's offline, it's interacting with the beneficiary, it's DIY, uh, linked to the nature of volunteering opportunity point, but also completely changes the game when it comes to designing or thinking of volunteering reflection. Language, obviously, very critical, and within language also, like certain sensitivity to certain kind of words. So, for example, if you are designing reflection for the same activity for a group of NSS volunteers from a college versus say a bunch of corporate volunteers, the language and the terminology you use to frame certain questions or prompts in your reflection will need to vary depending on the audience, right? Linked to that or related to that is volunteer demographic and personality. Like, who are your volunteers? Where are they coming from? What would they be expecting as a part of the volunteer engagement activity? Are they doing this because somebody else has asked them to do, or are they doing this because they really want to do it? Are they doing it when they have to choose between volunteering on a Saturday morning or hanging out with friends, or doing Netflix versus showing up at a beach cleanup activity? So really questioning who your core volunteers are. I would say like at least that would comprise of 70-80% of your volunteer base. Who are these people? What are the demographic attributes that one should be thinking about? Socioeconomic factors that you should be considering? Personality traits that are required for them to thrive or do well as a volunteer? What's the frequency, both of the opportunity and the frequency with which you'll do the reflection? I think Ram or somebody else in the form had asked this as a question, like, are we overdoing reflection, right? That's also a huge risk. While there is scope for improvising there, but I think it's also something very critical to be mindful of. And lastly, I think, and most importantly, I think one of the keys to making any reflection exercise work is the intention and expectation setting. Like, why are we here to do this, right? Why this activity? Why this particular day? What is it going to result into? What am I hoping that we will accomplish as a part of this volunteering activity? Very, very important that we uh, not just look at reflection as a post activity design, but pre and post, or pre, during, and post also in some cases, if that's possible. Um, and to be cognizant of the fact that what we are going to do as a reflection design is going to be linked with what expectation or intentions were set at the beginning of the activity or the opportunity. So very important. So these are just factors that one should be mindful of. We'll have time for Q&A, I guess somewhere in the middle or towards the end. But in the meanwhile, if related to the slides, if you have any questions, feel free to add them to the chat section and we'll respond to them. Yes, Bhumika. Awesome. So now that we understand what factors one should keep in mind, and there could be a few more as well. It's not an exhaustive list. I know that when we think of reflection for very specific opportunity, there could be a lot of customization that one may need to do. But those are just overall factors that one should keep in mind. When it comes to framework, there are a fair number of ways of approaching this. We have some examples or references also for you towards the end that you could look at. But broadly, based on my experience both as a volunteer and as a volunteer manager, and then whatever work we did with at EIV, we felt that there were these four levels or stages of volunteer reflection, right? Number one is feeling, number two is thinking, the third is internalizing, and fourth is action. What this means is, Bhumika, can we move to the next slide? Awesome. So I've listed down a bunch of things that each of these stages or aspects of reflection represent. I've also added some keywords there in terms of helping us get started with thinking about the framework and what that could mean in our own contexts. But essentially, what we want to do is uh, in our respective volunteering activities, if we had to design a reflection activity, right? I'm not focusing too much on how to go about it. Like, do we do a circle? Do we do a feedback form? Do we do a one-on-one reflection session? This is more about the why and the what of reflection that would help you think about what this could mean in your respective contexts. And ideal recommendation is to go in this flow so that you're able to structure your thoughts accordingly. So number one is feeling, right? Before and after the activity, what do we want the volunteers to feel about their participation in a certain volunteering opportunity, right? And there are various ways to arrive at a feeling, and this I think is the biggest uh, almost like a blind spot that people have, that people feel that, okay, if you ask standard set of questions, okay, how did it feel, right? How was your experience, or such blanket questions, it's only then that you always, it's natural that you should expect very blanket responses. It was great, right? Had a good time. Do you want to do this again? Yes, would love to come back again, right? Which is not even like it's not even feedback or reflection. I think it's just asking for the sake of it. But if you can create uh, a list of prompts or questions for you to first ask questions related to feeling, right? Because imagine any volunteering activity, volunteers have just finished it, and you want to really get them in a space where they're comfortable sharing what they just experienced, right? So that's why questions or prompts around feeling are a good starting point, where you're asking them questions on how are you feeling, but probably also nudging them with certain keywords, like, okay, for example, if it was a happy activity, like, how are you feeling doing this with a group of people, for example, right? If it's an intense activity, you obviously would want to give them a little more time to process, but also some more vocabulary to make sense of what they're feeling. So emotions is a word, but how do you arrive at the kind of emotions you think volunteers may feel after a certain opportunity is something that you can design or create prompts around, right? So at the feeling level, people are typically going to respond to questions around emotions, questions around environment. Okay, when you entered the classroom, how did you feel? Right? Did you draw parallels with your own classroom back in the day? When you showed up at the beach cleanup, what did you feel looking at the quantum of waste there? Right? When you were talking with a person with disability, what was your expectation? Like, did you feel that the person in their environment, living environment, would be different? So emotions, environment, and the other broad category that one typically responds to when it comes to feeling as a sort of a starting point is other people and objects and their sort of engagement, right? So, for example, you showed up at an activity, school painting seems to be a fairly popular activity amongst organizations. What did you feel looking at other people paint, right? Did you have a fun moment? Did you have, okay, somebody was really really pathetic or terrible at painting a wall, right? Did you feel like the class environment changed before and after? Did you expect that something like this would happen, right? So just asking them questions around emotions, environment, other people around them, and how, what are the other things around them, and their engagement with those objects or things during the course of the volunteering opportunity are a great starting questions just to get people warmed up, or make them respond to from a very surface level feeling and emotions and environment and things, right? uh, After we've done that, after we've posed certain questions or prompts around the feeling part, is when we should start moving towards thinking. Again, I'm not arriving at like the how or the frequency or all those points just yet. We'll do that in the second half of the conversation. But again, very important for us to reflect on what kind of thinking we want the volunteers to do before, during, and after the activity, right? I'm constantly going back to before, during, and after. If not during, then it definitely before and after. During may help you sort of design or revisit your volunteering opportunities in a certain way that help you incorporate some of these ideas into it. But going beyond the surface, when we want volunteers to start um, thinking about their volunteering experiences, right? So some good prompts to start get them interested in the process, and make them take the process even more seriously, is to start asking them questions around the kind of problem that we are trying to solve through the volunteering opportunity. Were they familiar with the problem? Did they know that this exists as a problem? There was their perception of the problem very different from what they observed or noticed while they were engaging, being around kids or showing up at whatever, right? And I think these frameworks sort of work in most setups. I don't think it's a function of a certain type of activity. So just probing in a nice way, obviously, questions around understanding and relationship to the problem, and has that changed, or has that at least made them question that when it comes to their experience in the volunteering opportunity. The second prompt or direction to get volunteers to start thinking is the solutioning aspect. Okay, we've understood that you had a certain perception of the problem. This is what we are trying to do. What do you feel about the solution? Do you think it's the best solution out there? Do you think it's an adequate solution? Do you think the solution is not good enough to solve this particular problem? What do you think, right? And slowly, how are you feeling that you want to be a part of the solution or not? Or do you think this is a great problem that I want to solve, but this may not be the solution that I want to use to solve, right? Or within the program, I may not be a good fit, but are there other ways for me to contribute within the organization of the program to solve the problem? So really sharp, and this is where I think you can take the liberty to sort of dig deeper. You don't need to make it easy. I think this is an opportunity where if you bring more sharper and pointed questions, is when the volunteers will start taking the process more seriously, and not think, yeah, this is just again one of the many things that they want to do. So how are we asking deeper, pointed, probing questions about the problem and the solution are great ways to think about the thinking prompts and questions in our reflection design. Then related to that, I think is just a bunch of uh, uh, threads that we can pull around how are they thinking that they are either contributing to the problem directly or indirectly. If not, then how do they see themselves being a part of the solution? How do they think that solving this problem, or even like this problem as it exists, how is it impacting society as a whole, right? And how does solving for that problem benefit the society at large? And I think this is when you start creating that um, opportunity within volunteers, wherein they start thinking of their engagement beyond, okay, how much time am I giving, what am I doing here, what will I get in return, but really sort of engaging with the problem and the solution and the opportunity at a far more deeper level. And we often, all of us in our area of work, we keep thinking about volunteer impact and how do we measure qualitative, quantitative impact. I think reflection does provide you with a lot of tools and insights to go about curating some of your impact metrics and then working backwards to create reflection activities that will help you arrive at some qualitative or quantitative impact metrics later. highly underutilized. I don't think most organizations use reflection as a means to an end. They typically use feedback or just certain surveys as a part of that. But reflection combined with feedback, etc., is far more powerful. Uh, the next part is internalizing. How are we going beyond just the feeling part and the thinking part, and enabling volunteers to uh, create a far more deeper connection to what we are doing, right? Does the experience leave the volunteer with a lot of questions about the problem, about the solution, about us as an organization? Are they discovering certain answers that they were either seeking or just stumbled upon during the course of their engagement with us? Are they beginning to ask questions about the impact that all of this is creating, about uh, uh, are they qualified to be doing what they are doing? Do they need training when they are mostly people as volunteers just show up and think that I'm qualified to do whatever it is that I expected to do. But like when you start internalizing, you start asking questions like these, like how am I best placed to do this? If not, then what can I do to train myself, get myself ready? um, and like how do I then start going beyond feeling and thinking, but also owning up the entire process of not just volunteering in that limited context of that particular opportunity, but also how am I internalizing my learnings and reflections to become a better person, to contribute more proactively towards volunteering or towards whatever other opportunities that might exist. The last stage for us to be mindful of, I think this is part outcome and part design. Uh, so when you take people through an experience of feeling, thinking, internalizing, the best indicator of your entire journey as a process succeeding is if it results into some kind of action. It could be either people choosing to do repeat instances of volunteering, people wanting to do a lot more than what the volunteering opportunity entails, people promoting our opportunity to get more people to join the cause, to connect us to other folks who can contribute towards it, etc. The other dimension of looking at act is also to see, okay, if I am in my thinking and internalizing, if I made that connect that okay, I am also contributing towards the problem in some way, how am I then making certain shifts at a personal level, at an individual level, so also kind of try and eliminate the problem at the source, at least at my individual level. I may not be able to do it at an aggregate societal level, but can I start making certain lifestyle shifts to eliminate the problem at the source at least my level, right? So are there actions that reflect that journey, that growth? And again, questions could be around, okay, you've been doing this volunteering for a while now, do you see any changes in your day-to-day life? Are you making any changes in how you go about your life before and after you've started volunteering? And last is obviously, as all non-profits would love, if that also results into us volunteers raising money for us, bringing in, doing either crowdfunding campaigns, bringing in a CSR and other money. I've listed down a few examples. I'm going to quickly take just a couple of minutes to talk about those. Just a second. Quickly share some examples, and then we move on to an activity that we thought would be a good way to start thinking about some of these ideas and put them in perspective. Around feeling, one of my earliest experiences as a volunteer and then as a program team member was with a mentoring organization. And when I go back and think about the kind of program and reflection design that we had, I think the thing that worked best for us was to ask feeling based questions that are far more more frequently during our check-in calls, weekly, fortnightly, etc. The thinking questions were not as frequent, so we would sort of think about both these questions as things that we want to ask, but also ask it more strategically, right? So feeling questions were more frequent, thinking questions were more like quarterly or 6 monthly, etc., depending on the mentor mentee pair. But the bigger learning there was we would also ask similar set of questions to the mentees, right? So the reflection was not just for the mentors or the volunteers, but also people on the receiving end. Although I like to believe mentoring is a two-way street, but just to hear responses to a similar set of questions, reflection questions from the mentee and the mentor, would give us a lot of clarity in terms of what's going well, what's not going well, etc., etc. In terms of thinking, uh, one of my favorite examples is this activity that we've done with a bunch of college students in Mumbai, where we took them for a beach cleanup activity. And like beach cleanup keeps happening every week, multiple groups in Mumbai that facilitated. But what we did differently with the group was, before and after, we did a reflection circle and we asked people questions around, okay, initially, obviously, intention and expectation setting question, like, how are you feeling? What do you think we'll do here? How much waste do you think we'll collect? And like, that's a mix of feeling and thinking kind of question. People will say, yeah, acha, theek hai, this much kgs worth of garbage and stuff like that. But when we did the reflection session towards the end, and almost went through this flow of asking feeling and thinking based questions, and hopefully leading up to internalizing an action at a later stage, people started saying things like, okay, when I picked up that Parle-G wrapper, I was wondering whether the Parle-G that I had a week ago, did that, like, what's the probability or what are the odds of that sort of showing up at the beach here, right? Or I wonder, the waste that I put in the dustbin right outside my college, where does that go, right? So just enabling them to think about these questions prompted these kind of ideas or questions or exclamation marks in their mind, right? And it's just, I mean, there were many other people also doing this, but most people did not reflect on the activity, and that's the difference. And I can share more about what the beach cleanup group ended up doing over the 10 12 odd weeks that we did a volunteer experience journey for them. Internalize, I think, environment, I've written it as an extension of the beach cleanup activity. But even otherwise, I think, uh, I'll come back to this example later. I just want to make sure that we are using different cause areas and not repeating the same. In terms of acts, there are multiple examples I've written. I think people who volunteer for animal care are obviously the biggest proponents. And so, therefore, for them to go from feeling to act is almost like day one, right? Like, they're there because they feel passionately. They may start thinking they're already internalized a lot of these principles, but they start sort of getting doing repeat volunteering, getting more people, getting money, etc. Likewise, with persons with disabilities, I think it's a tricky part to sort of take people through the initial friction or hesitation, if I may. But once they do it, I think they become very, very strong ambassadors of the cause, especially because the feeling component is very strong in the by the virtue of the cause itself, and people's perception of the cause and what they might end up doing there. But if you are able to curate that and elongate that in a way where people are able to do this repeatedly and make sense of how they are making a difference, I think it just becomes an amazing cause for people to keep doing more and more towards. There's a fun temple example, but I think we'll do that after the activity. I'll share more about that. Megha, are we good on time?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Bhumika, next slide, please. Awesome. So we have 54 folks here, or 50 odd, minus AI and IWT folks. Awesome. So we have an activity. We want all of us to spend about 5 minutes thinking through this. That based on whatever we've known so far through the virtue of this session, or generally whatever you feel you know about reflection as an activity, I want all of us to imagine ourselves being a volunteer manager with a non-profit that works for senior citizens. And if we had to design a reflection activity, like whether it's the kind of questions that we ask, the feel, think, internalize, act, or how do you want to go about it? The tools part will come to later, but based on what you already know, how reflection works, how facilitation works, how we should go about it. If you were a volunteer manager for an NGO working for senior citizens and had to design a reflection activity for a one-time volunteering opportunity, wherein the volunteers would have come to the old age home, spent 2 3 hours teaching how to use a mobile phone or a laptop or a tablet to the senior citizen, resident senior citizens there. And these students, we can consider them to be, students, volunteers from a nearby NSS college NSS chapter. And so, if you had to think of what reflection questions one should ask them after the activity is done, for them to make sense of what they just did and to find some meaning, to find some feeling, thinking, perhaps some kind of internalizing or action, what would those be? So the expectation is that after 5 minutes, if you can just have a round of sharing from the group, either in chat or by unmuting yourself, in terms of what kind of questions as a volunteer manager would you ask, or prompts would you ask the volunteers who've undergone this activity to make sense of what they've done. Any doubts or questions? Anybody who's not understood what we need to do? No unmuting only. No muting. No unmuting, please. Only chat. Sorry. Mega's strict instructions not to unmute. But yeah, I think maybe we'll have unmuting as an option towards the end when we do Q&A. We'll take about 3 to 5 minutes. Once your section would be great. Can we get the? Of course. We have legends here. I think this feels like an exam. Neha asking me framework slide. Awesome. Bhumika, can we go to the previous slide? Maybe after like 30 seconds, I just want everybody to look at the activity first. And then after 30 seconds, Bhumika, if you can go to the previous slide for the remaining duration of the activity. Thank you. Megha says I wasn't supposed to say it aloud. Megha, there are no filters here. Sorry about that. How did you feel about the interaction? Okay, sorry. Achha, it's a question for the prompt. I thought you're asking me. Sorry, Manisha. Thank you, Manisha. Thanks for getting the ball rolling. How did you feel about the interaction? Okay, good starting point. Awesome, awesome, awesome. So many prompts already. I don't know if. Interesting. Awesome. I think a bunch of questions we've pretty much covered. Uh, wow, really, really good questions. I feel. I think we can just wrap up the session now, Mega. People clearly here know what they need to do. uh, uh, Superb. Keep sharing, folks. I think we'll slowly move to the next section. But any questions that in the comments that you resonate with? There are some really, really good quality questions. I mean, only if I could highlight some, but there are just plentiful of those. I really like how we have a full range of asking very basic questions, but with certain sort of prompts. Like I think there was a question around feeling, but Like, did you feel sad, happy, or surprised at some point, and what was that instance when you felt that? So those are good ways to move beyond surface level questions, but also allowing people a little more comfort there. Then a lot more really fantastic questions. I think you know whether it's building a connection to the cause. There are a few plus ones also that I can see now. Great. Awesome. So, if there are any questions that resonated with you that you feel that you hadn't thought about until somebody mentioned it in the chat, or because of the framework you were able to think, please add it in the comments. We'll quickly move to the next section, and then we can revisit this. A lot of the like there's this, I think, and perhaps one more slide, and after that we can go to brainstorming and Q&A, and just use this space. I think really amazing questions and prompts in the comment section. Thank you, everyone. Now, when we think of tools and references, right? I think somebody had asked. I forget her name. I think she's here from Claylab. Who had asked a question around what kind of tools should we use when it comes to reflections, right? This, by the way, is a proof that we actually read the form and the survey that you send in, and not just ask you to fill that for filling sake. But uh, so there are different tools to do reflection, right? Some that we are, most of these are, I think, I would believe that we are familiar with, but I have some recommendation on how to uh, 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 probably decide, or how to go about doing some experimentation around that. But for those who are not familiar, there is a circle that you can host like at the start and the end of the activity, where typically a good size for a circle is about 8 to 10. Anything more than that typically becomes very difficult to hold a good conversation, to really allow everybody to reflect. 8 to 10 is also sometimes on the higher side. I mean, if the facilitator is really, really good, then you can maybe do more also, maybe 12 or 13 if it's possible. It is typically doable if this is like they've been doing it for a while and it's a repeat nature of reflection. But if you're just getting started as a volunteer, or you're just uh, new to this whole idea of how to do reflection, then a circle is a good way to go about it. You form a circle at the start, you form a circle at the end. Start, you have some questions that we've already discussed, we can discuss more. Towards the end also, all the prompts that we heard for this particular case study, or as an activity, or as an example, we can hold that circle together. The facilitator can start with one prompt as a question, go around the circle. There are different ways of how you can do it. We can obviously speak more about the nitty gritty of it towards the end if needed. Otherwise, there are, if it's a large group of 30-40 volunteers, a good recommendation is to sort of have smaller groups with other co-facilitators, like 5 or 6 people in a group, sort of facilitated by one volunteer facilitator or volunteer manager, and then multiple such groups doing smaller reflections, and then probably at some point coming together as a whole as well, if that's an opportunity or an option. The other way of doing reflection is obviously one-on-one, like when you are either right after the activity physically or over a call, etc., are able to speak to the volunteer and ask certain questions for them to be able to respond to. These are typically this is highly recommended in long-term volunteering opportunities, where you want the volunteers to feel connected to what we are doing, and also be able to respond to not just SOS situations, but really look for small signs and subtle things that might be going wrong, and for you to sort of pick up on those threads during the reflections and to be able to resolve. Again, I'm going to request all of us to be a little mindful of that. This is different from feedback, and we'll come to why it's different. But one-on-one reflections are also great, especially when it comes to long-term volunteering. Um, uh, then there are groups, I think, slightly different from circle, in the sense that we uh, can have multiple facilitators within a group. We can have different kinds of prompts flowing across the circle, for lack of a better word. But how are we, different people within a larger group, holding different threads, right? So is somebody responsible to uh, ask questions around the feeling part, somebody else holds the thread around thinkings, or maybe somebody is just making sure everybody is participating, the other person is ensuring that there is, you're sticking to the reflection and not digressing from the path. So groups are typically multiple facilitators and larger setups. The last type of tool when it comes to reflection is written. Again, people do all kinds of things, whether it's just jotting down what you feel in a diary, or through a feedback form or a reflection form right after the activity, or you experience what you've done. We'll give you some prompts, you reflect on this and write a letter or a note to us after the activity, right? One interesting tool, both I think it's a tool and a means to the end when it comes to reflection, that I have uh, experienced and used is silence as a tool, right? Which is to between the activity and when you start asking them these questions, can we give them some time to reflect, maybe on certain prompts, maybe just silent reflection, like just reflect on how the experience was, and then people can choose how they want to share about it. Do they want to do a written sharing? Do they want to share it in a circle? Do they want to do it one on one? So it's, in a way, I mean, you can use multiple tools, but silence also is a tool for you to allow people that sort of pause between the activity and their reaction or response to it, right? Most often we lose out on the on the depth, simply because we are in a rush. Okay, activity is done now, let's get the circle together, ask them these questions and wrap up, right? But especially when you're looking at creating a deeper intent and for people to consider doing this for a long period of time, having silence and I'll share a couple of examples if time allows me. Silence being really, really a powerful medium for or a tool for reflection. There are a bunch of frameworks. Megha can certainly share these after the session with those that may find it useful. I volunteers come up with a couple. There are Carl's model, Gibbs model. All of these are borrowed from Aarti very shamelessly. I don't know if she's here, but she'd recommended these as a part of this preparing for this session. And then a bunch of other facilitator frameworks as well. Score is just the name of the college for which we had done that volunteer design, wherein we also had a huge aspect of reflection. We call it the score framework, but essentially just building on a bunch of these and sort of created something around that. So these are frameworks with very specific guidelines on how you could uh, think about the question, the design, the tools, etc. And we'll share links to all of these with you after the session. But some of these frameworks we are familiar with, so we thought we'll share them here for you to explore. Um, Last part in the tools and references section. Oh, sorry. No, please go back. Huh. Last part in the tools and references section is feedback and reflection. I feel that oftentimes we uh, confuse the two for the same. Like feedback is reflection, reflection is feedback. Uh, what I typically recommend, and something that I have always done in volunteering activities where I've been involved, is to do reflection and feedback, right? So, and I think a combination of both really helps a lot to figure out the nuances. Like you'll get certain quantitative inputs. For example, if you had to think of, okay, I'll do a feedback form with simple ratings on a scale of 1 to 5. How do you think what the activity facilitated? Whether you had enough clarity in terms of what you had to do, etc., etc. So a lot more quantitative and very exacting sort of questions in feedback, complemented with certain questions that you asked during reflection. I think the biggest opportunity here, if you are able to use feedback as a mechanism and reflection as a mechanism, is that when you bring the two together, there are so many insights that you get about the activity, about the program, what you want to be doing differently the next time around. What is it the volunteers are saying in feedback, and is it really aligning with what they're sharing in reflection, right? So if we can take this opportunity for us to, if you are only doing feedback until now, or if you're only doing heavily on reflection, unless you are one of those who are doing both proactively, but also if you're not already looking at both together, like you're looking at feedback and reflection and making sense of it, it's an incredible source of insight for you to think about feedback and reflection, and how do you do incorporate both as a part of your program design. Some activities, I think, again, share towards the end if I get an opportunity. Feedback and reflection, etc. We did this in Score, the same college experience volunteering journey that we'd done, wherein after every session we would do feedback and reflection, and then we would incorporate that feedback and reflection to tweak the volunteering journey if needed the next week, right? So that also made the volunteers feel that, okay, the reflections that we are sharing, the feedback that we are giving, also is informing the program design and the delivery in some shape or form, either immediately or in the short to medium term. Cool. Next slide, please, Bhumika. This was just to, again, a reminder or a prompt for us to think about those three questions. That when we're thinking of tools and resources, also just going back to those three fundamental questions that a volunteer might have. Why volunteer for this cause? Why volunteer for this org or organization? And why volunteer repeatedly or over an extended period of time? I think this is the last slide, and just some input, just like we had some factors at the beginning. I think one of the key elements that make a reflection a great uh, aspect is how one facilitates reflection. So the design part is one. We've been discussing design so far, but how does the delivery of reflection happen also can be a game changer, right? Some factors that I feel have helped me and generally folks who are great at reflection or facilitation when it comes to volunteering opportunities is, number one, whether they have experienced that as a volunteer themselves. Have you done what you're saying, what you are trying to get a grasp of the feeling or the thinking or the internalizing of the action, or you're just talking in a very abstract manner? Your expectations are very abstract. You think very differently from how a volunteer would. And often a recommendation is that if you are being a facilitator, it's always a great starting point for you to start being a volunteer yourself, or at least experience some part of that volunteering, so that you can facilitate reflection or overall design also more effectively, right? The big One of the risks of reflection is, just like any group setting, I think just making sure that we are giving space for everybody in the circle, or even if it's a group setting or a one-on-one setting also, how are we making sure that it's not just swinging in one direction, or people who are much more expressive are sort of taking away or hogging the limelight, and or more importantly, not influencing the thought process or reflection process for the others. So facilitator really needs to be aware of how the power structure is within the setup. Facilitator needs to be a great listener. I don't think not just in terms of designing, but while you are there, it's possible that some of the questions that you wanted to ask, you may not even feel like asking, because you're getting a lot more insights and ideas and inspiration from just that one or two questions that you had asked, right? But you can only be uh, able to sort of leverage or build on that if you're listening and not saying, yes, I take your first question, what does everybody feel? Second question, what do you think? Right? It really needs you to be present and to be listening actively. I think another factor that plays a huge role in a facilitator's ability to do this is the difference between a person who's designed the reflection activity and the delivery of reflection. This is also a risk when it comes to organizations which are scaling, and say, the founders who come from a facilitator background or were the first ones who designed the reflection had a certain approach, and then there are, like, people at second degree, third degree now delivering those facilitations for you. So are they comfortable with the same sort of frameworks that you used while you were doing reflection circles or reflection as an activity, or do you want them to give some opportunity to improvise in the way that they can leverage their own strengths as a facilitator? So just being mindful of the difference between design and delivery, and therefore not to have a very similar benchmark that everybody will be a similar kind of facilitator is a risky proposition. Um, Before and after, I think, is just that doing some reflection at the beginning, the intention expectation setting that we discussed at the start, and being able to do this at the end. So just how alive is the facilitator? Are they rushing at the beginning, just running around making sure things are happening, or are they present and able to deliver reflection at the beginning and also towards the end, right? So just making sure that the facilitator is creating opportunities for themselves and not running around doing logistics or operational stuff makes their job easier as a facilitator. And lastly, I think just being mindful of the assumptions that you're bringing, whether it's the demographic part that we spoke about, or you may think that the volunteer would say these kind of things during the reflection, but a lot of it comes with our own bias and assumptions that we are making about the person, about how everybody or every person would engage with a certain type of volunteering and a reflection journey, right? So being mindful of that as a facilitator is very, very helpful, so that you can again be a better listener and respond to what is actually happening versus what you thought is happening. Awesome. Do we have any more slides? I don't think so. There's Q&A and brainstorming after this.
And
Cool,
this is
cool,
the last
cool.
time.
Thank you everybody for listening patiently so far.
Thanks, Dharmaraj.
Let's
There are
open
some
to
questions in the
questions.
chat that you can
Uh,
look at. People can also unmute and ask or raise their hand and ask questions. So Ram has a question, Dharmaraj.
huh.
Despite having frameworks in place, some individuals struggle with reflection. Do you think reflection can be developed as a skill?
Sorry, can you repeat, Mega?
Look
It's
at
in
the
the
chat.
chat also, Dharmaraj.
I'm just
And
checking.
yeah, he's basically trying to ask if reflection can be developed as a skill.
You mean in terms of the volunteers or the facilitator?
Volunteer.
Ram,
Very simple. So when a new volunteer comes into picture, right? So reflection is a not a basic skill for everybody, right? From that aspect, despite having frameworks in place, the level of reflection is different for different individuals.
Of course.
Correct. So do you think reflection can be developed as a skill?
I think this is going back to your question, like if you're overthinking reflection as a program, I think it can be developed as a skill. Certainly, just to answer that in isolation, I certainly feel it is a skill that one can develop just like any other skill. Whether one needs to or not, I think it's a separate question altogether. It completely depends on the intention of the quality of reflection. If you feel that you're unable to make meaning for the volunteers because of them not unable to respond or unable to reflect deeply, then we could probably not train but rather sort of create opportunities where it becomes a stepped process, right? Instead of saying that we expect everybody to have similar level of feelings or thinkings, rather if we have something at a group level, but a certain, like in your case, Ram, if it's a volunteer leader who's struggling with reflection and therefore unable to sort of draw meaning for themselves or for their respective volunteer or cohort members, I think how can we do a combination of both? Like we do general reflection for all, and then we also do some staged reflection for this person to make sense of reflection as a skill and as a process. But yeah, I think just maybe a session like this, like in terms of helping them understand why reflection matters and doing this may help.
Purva has then asked, can you give an example of what prompt you will give for feedback and reflection after the activity?
So I think I'll go back to the score example, Purva. I feel so. This is like we had done a volunteer journey of about 8 to 10 weeks with students across multiple cause areas. Um, there are a bunch of things we did. So initial set of weeks we had similar questions for all group for their reflection, but the feedback questions were similar throughout, and the feedback questions were very short. I think feedback questions were largely quantitative, on a scale wale type ke questions, and just rating and comparing those kind of questions, because we just wanted to for them to objectively tell us how has it been for them. Whereas reflection questions, the initial 2 or 3 weeks, we had similar questions for most groups. But after week 3 or 4, depending on how people were engaging with the cause or with reflection also as an activity, we like in one group, I remember around week 4, I actually stopped facilitating. I figured that the group was very self-reflective themselves, and we actually started then nominating members of the group to become facilitators, right? And but around week 5 or 6, they started designing their own feedback, sorry, reflection questions. So if I had to give you like a very crude, broad, vague answer, Purva, I think feedback is much better when it comes to objective and a tangible way for you to measure whatever it is that you want to do, with obviously a space for them to also share their thoughts and feelings and reflective kind of questions as well. Whereas reflection is, I would say, a lot more patient activity. I don't think it's something that we need to rush into or we need to sort of arrive at very tangible answers for. So what kind of prompts I would ask? I think prompts would be like, if I had to compare feedback and reflection, feedback would just be a lot of quantitative questions, and reflections would be a lot more qualitative questions. And within that, I mean, you're fairly experienced. I don't think you need to know how to go about those. But if it doesn't answer your question, let me know. I'll happy to elaborate or answer more.
Thanks. Manasa has asked, how effective is self-reflection compared to facilitated reflection? And how is the quality of reflection ensured, especially for new volunteers where reflection might be an acquired skill that comes over time?
Yeah, great question,
Yeah,
Mansa.
I think the second part you already answered in the previous question.
Yeah.
Just the first part you can take up. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. So I think how effective is self-reflection compared to facilitated reflection? I think uh, it's very, very subjective. I think in all the facilitation that I have done, I've seen people who, for example, a lot of you in the beginning of the activity or the session said that you are familiar, you already do a lot of reflection at your personal level. People who are used to the idea of reflecting find it far more easier to sort of switch and become self-reflective and then respond, whereas people who are not familiar to the idea of or the concept of reflection or to the kind idea of reflection in a sort of social setting may sort of find it easier when we begin with facilitated reflection to moving on to self-reflection, right? Because uh, otherwise it's very difficult for us to ensure the quality, which is what is your follow-up question as well. That if we only leave it to them to determine how the reflection on what the outcomes would be, I think we are leaving it too much to chance to ensure good quality of reflection and their experience overall. So my recommendation, especially when it comes to new volunteers, would be to start with facilitated reflection and then creating opportunities for them to start doing self-reflection as well, and then not moving or not doing a complete transition, but using a mix of self and facilitated would be a good opportunity. Like you can do, if you're doing self reflection this week, the next week's facilitated reflection can build on the self reflection that they did the last week or the opportunity before that. So combination and that staged approach is always recommended.
Right. And also using existing volunteers who have done
Always,
the
always.
reflection to facilitate, I think, yeah.
Absolutely, which is why the facilitation, my the first bullet point was that if you have experienced this as a volunteer, all of this just becomes a lot more easy in that sense.
Yeah.
Megha, which
So
somebody
Gayatri has a question that we can take quickly is, should feedback exercise be done before reflection questions or how?
uh, I typically recommend doing reflection questions first and then feedback, because the risk with feedback questions is it will form judgments in your mind much sooner, right? So your reflection activity or quality of reflection will get affected by feedback because you've already formed a judgment. Okay, on a scale of 1 to 5, this was my experience, or this is how am I feeling, right? So immediately after the activity, whether it's online, offline, whatever, ideal to do a reflection first. Feedback can even happen later, like you've done the activity, after at the end of the day you're sending them a feedback form and the responses can come in. Again, ideal would be to do the activity, reflection, feedback all in one go right there and then, but people may not have the bandwidth to do it, etc. So reflection followed by feedback for sure. I think the other way around will give you poor quality outcomes from the reflection, but you can experiment. I mean, and let us know, Gayatri, if it has worked for you.
Okay, thank you.
Somebody is also
Uh,
raised their hand. I don't know.
yeah.
Ha, Megha, please go ahead.
Hi. We'll take one more question and then you can go. Prachi is asking, do you see free reflection help for better engagement during the volunteering? Sorry, it's in
Oh,
the chat.
absolutely, Prachi. I think again, some of these things I would recommend that you try, Prachi, and you let us know also how is it going. And the intent of this webinar also is like, I mean, I'm always around and accessible, as some of the folks on the call would know. But even Megha and the rest of the team who are, intending to use this webinar as an exercise for all of us to build these processes for ourselves. Uh, uh, I mean, based on everything that I've done, I think the answer is a straightforward yes. If you do pre-reflection, it completely changes the game in terms of not just post activity, but even during the activity. People just have a very different perception of why they are doing what they are doing, how should they be engaging, etc., etc. But would again, if this is something that is new to you, Prachi, would love to see how you can do an A/B testing. Like you do one activity without a pre-reflection and the other with a combination of both, and tell us how it works for you, and what sort of learnings or insights you have from those and how we can help you build on that. Yeah.
Thanks. I don't know if your name is Zubia, but please go ahead.
Hi.
That was an amazing session. And thank you for so much detail. I had one quick question. You mentioned that you've been a part of a mentoring, volunteering opportunity.
Can't hear.
So, for the mentor,
We can't hear you very clearly. Your voice is breaking.
mentee together, and is there any reference that you could recommend?
Zubia, we couldn't hear you. Sorry, can you put it on chat or maybe try switching off your
Mm.
video and then speak?
Okay, I'll type it.
Sorry,
Yeah,
thanks.
yeah.
Um, Dharmaraj, there's a question by Mariam.
Okay. Sorry, as volunteers are not bound, how to get them account what they have committed. Mariam, I think this is a separate session. Like how to how to get people to. Thanks, Neha. Yeah, Mariam, I think it requires a different session and like um, uh, uh, again, Mega and team. I'm sure like a lot of folks on the group here in the EIV community can help you figure out. Not figure out maybe, but at least help you share been doing experimenting to get greater commitments from volunteers. But what I can say, Mariam, is that reflection does help increase their commitment levels. I think it just because they have a lot more skin in the game, right? So unlike saying that, hey, you come here because we're partnering with your company, or because NSS hours will get counted, or because uh, you know uh, your friend signed up and they've asked you to come here. Once you are using pre-reflection during end of the session reflection, etc., uh, it has a huge potential to increase their commitment, simply because they have a lot more skin in the game, simply because they're not just looking at it as an option. कि, "अच्छा, ठीक है, on a Saturday, do I go for this or not? I signed up for it, but can I give an excuse? Something has come up and I don't show up," right? Because they are engaging. They've had an element of feeling. They've been thinking. Probably had some internalizing that has happened. So if you ask me uh, how to do it, as I said, it requires a little more deeper thought. But if reflection can help you gain greater commitments from volunteers, absolutely yes. And again, a lot of people in the call who have been creating and curating long-term volunteering opportunities can also probably validate or share if that's worked for them or not. Awesome. Could you please share? Oh yeah. I think lots of. I think there is. So in EIV we used to have this publicly accessible drive. I think it's still there. We did have a subfolder called mentoring, and the mentoring had curriculum and a set of reflection on all kinds of tools and frameworks from multiple mentoring organizations across the world, including those in India. So you can check with Mega. It'll give you a lot more options. That's all. But yeah, happy to connect separately one-on-one if needed, if you want to curate some mentoring based opportunities to reflect, but plentiful already exists. So I think just go over those, and then happy to chat, or Mega and team can also. Please put your
Thanks.
asks in the feedback form and we'll be happy to share. Awesome. I think we have overshot by about 5-6 minutes. Happy to take more questions for another 10 odd
Okay, we
minutes.
could take one more question. I think Akina has put a lot of efforts to type it in. We'll
Yes.
take one more question and then we can close.
Akina is also the person who, in her earlier comments, had Q dot and then followed by all the questions. I think I appreciate people who put in the formatting efforts while while typing in a Zoom chat as well. Uh, thanks, Akina. Finding an interesting thing. Oh my God, this is a controversial question. Yeah, I think so. Akina, I think it's also going back to one of the earlier points that I had, right? When you're thinking of reflection, I think the demographic plays a huge role. How are you asking questions also matters a lot. The kind of responses that you would expect and anticipate, I think also matters a lot. I feel that with Gen Z, I think it's they definitely are. I mean, as a lot more aware as a generation, a lot more involved. They want to be engaged. How much of it is meaningful, etc., is obviously subjective. And while they may like to believe that they are doing a lot, feeling very strongly about things, etc., I think it's one very important to experiment with them. I don't think what works for older generation as reflection ideas or questions or tools would work with younger folks. But at the same time, for example, one of the things we had done with one group where we instead of, I mean, we did the reflection, but instead of feedback, we actually on the group did an emoji thing, like on a scale of this thing, how was the session like? Because they communicate more in emojis than on a scale of 1 to 5 or whatever. We did an emoji sort of feedback to just give them a little more familiar lingo in that sense, right? In terms of reflection, I think what helps is to help them look beyond the surface, in the sense that you ask them certain questions, get them into that and again, I can use that score as a framework or an example here, because the students there were about 20-21 year olds, right, who were a part of that. And initially they were unsure of what to even make of volunteering, let alone reflection, right? But slowly, when they started seeing that, for example, if we were doing a reflection circle, we asked a question and we said that, okay, your response can't be a one word response, and you had to not repeat what the previous person has said, right? And even if that means there is an awkward silence until you say something, we give you that opportunity to do that, right? So I think with them, it's more important to help them recognize why the process is important far more than what question we are asking. If they feel this is time pass, like they're just asking, and like, I'll just be on my phone while they're asking, and I'll just say a word and then go back to my phone while they're asking, they will not appreciate the process at all, right? So the best way to get them involved is to think less about the question, but how will you get responses, how will you get them to engage or participate, right? What are the if your activity allows, are there like any pop culture references that you can bring in your reflection sessions, right? Are there certain ways, for example, one I don't remember which organization, but one way they got people to reflect, I mean, it's one medium, but one way they actually got volunteers to reflect, especially young volunteers, is to talk about their volunteering experience as an Instagram story, right? Share a screenshot of what you experienced and share like a snippet. Here are some prompts, like talk about what did you feel, what did you think was your favorite part, etc. I don't think we should replace the actual experience reflection uh, with only Instagram stories, but Instagram stories could be one of the tools for you to get them to share, right? And they can think a lot more in the form of an Instagram story compared to a feedback form. So that could be one example. I mean, similarly, if you are keeping yourself abreast with all the latest features and functionalities on social media apps, I think you'll be better off with designing reflection sessions for them. But the intent there is, then you're thinking and operating like Gen Z, and not asking them to think like a 40-year-old and fill a form. All right. So I think the medium there, and why doing this matters more than the what. What I think they are once they understand the why and why this matters, they are a lot more involved, far more than most other volunteer demographics that you would engage with. Cool. A lot of folks saying that they will reflect
Right.
on the session and come back. Mega, we need to do a reflection session separately.
Thanks,
The
thanks,
feedback one.
Dharmaraj. Absolutely. Please do fill out the feedback form so we can send out the links to you and maybe connect you with Dharmaraj for more questions. Pooja, I know your question was not addressed, but maybe you can connect directly with Dharmaraj and get answers to that.
Already done
Thanks a
that.
lot, Dharmaraj.
Okay. Namita,
Speak to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Pooja.